Today we are going to learn about experimental design. Our goal is to find out what are the components of a fair controlled experiment. To do this, we will look at multiple topics. The first topic is, what is a testable question? Well, science is driven by questions about natural phenomena and the way things work and behave. Questions come in one of two basic forms, either testable or untestable. Testable questions must have a specific manipulated and responding value, or in other words, one value that is changed in the experiment and the other one that is measured. Some examples of this are, how do or does the first thing affect the second thing? Will changing the amount of one thing cause something to happen? Will this measure increase or decrease if this other variable is changed? If this thing is increased or decreased, then the effects on this other thing will be this. Untestable questions are questions that do not indicate specific variables to test or measure. For example, why do blackberries have thorns? Well, although we can't answer this, we can turn it into a testable question. For example, how do the number of thorns affect how many animals eat from a blackberry bush? Go ahead and try to set up your own experiment to test this. Next, we will look at the types of variables in an experiment. To do this, we'll look at how mushroom height is affected by the type of fertilizer applied over 1 week. So the type of fertilizer is what the scientist decides. So it is the independent or manipulated variable. The height of the mushrooms is what the scientist measures or observes in the experiment. It is called the dependent or responding variable. So, what is a way that we can easily remember which variable is which? Well, think about mix and dry. Mix means manipulated, independent, x-axis. Dry means dependent, responding, y-axis. So, when we go to plot a graph of how mushroom height is affected by fertilizer over 1 week, our manipulated independent variable, the fertilizer type, goes on the x-axis, and our dependent responding variable goes on the y-axis, in this case, mushroom height. Now, try labeling the variables on this graph's axis. Next, let's look at the constants in an experiment. Let's look at a testable question. For example, which fruit out of oranges, apples, or avocados will attract the most fruit flies through a hole in a jar? So there are constants, which are also known as standardizing variables, that need to stay the same for each test in a controlled experiment. Notice how in this experiment the number of flies added to the flask to begin with is 100. The flask is attached by a narrow tube and a small hole into the jar. And then the number at the end is the number of flies counted on the fruit at the end of the time.